excited. Thanks again for joining us for this evening's event. My name is Kevin. I'm one of the event hosts here at Powell's Books. And before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. One of the many events we're looking forward to is Rafia Zakaria and her new book, Against White Feminism, in conversation with Jean Guerrero. That's next Thursday, August 19th. And if you don't already do so, please follow us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. Tonight, we're so excited to welcome back Melissa Broder and Katherine D Morgan. Melissa Broder is the author of the novels Milk Fed and The Pisces, the essay collection So Sad Today, and four poetry collections, including Last Sext. Broder has written for the New York Times, Elle.com, Vice, and many others. She's a winner of a Pushcart Prize for poetry. Superdoom brings together the best of Broder's 3 out-of-print poetry collections, as well as the best of her newer work. These poems embrace the sacred and the profane, often simultaneously, while Broder gazes into the abyss and at the human body with humor and heartbreak, lust and terror. Broder's language is entirely her own, marked both by brutal strangeness and raw intimacy. At terms essayistic and surreal, bouncing between the grotesque and the transcendent, Superdoom is a must-have for longtime fans and the perfect introduction to one of our most brilliant and original poets. She joins us tonight from Los Angeles. Joining Broder in conversation this evening is Katherine D Morgan. Morgan is a current bookseller here at Powell's Books. She's the author of the chapbook, No Self-Respecting Woman. Katherine's work has appeared or is forthcoming in Huffington Post, Bitch Media, Lit Hub, The Rumpist, Hello Giggles, Real Simple, and many others. Her work has been nominated for 2 Best of the Net awards, and she's joining us from right here in Portland tonight. This evening's event includes an audience Q&A. If you have a question, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. And if someone has typed a question that you like, you can even upvote that question by clicking the thumbs up button. Most importantly, please consider supporting Melissa and Powell's by purchasing a copy of her new book from us. A link to buy Superdoom will be shared in the chat a couple of times this evening. Melissa, Katherine, thanks for joining us tonight. We're really excited to have you both with us.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, yeah, I guess we'll start. I was going to read a couple poems and then we'll do our Q&A.
Sounds good.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'm just going to read 4 poems from Superdoom. And Kevin did such a good introduction. I don't really have to tell you what Superdoom is. So I'm not going to. All right. Here's 4 or so, 3 to 4 poems from Superdoom. This poem is called Lunar Shatters. I came into the world a young man. Then I broke me off. Still the sea and clouds are Pegasus colors. My heart is Pegasus colors, but to get there, I must go back to the time before I was a woman, before I broke me off to make a flattened lap, and placed there on a young man, where I myself could have dangled, and how I begged him enter there, my broken young man parts, and how I let the mystery collapse with rugged young man puncture, and how I begged him turn me Pegasus colors, and pleased to put a sunset there, and gone forever was my feeling snake, and in its place dark letters, and me the softest of all, and me so skinless I could no longer be naked, and me I had to de-banshee, and me I dressed myself. I made a poison suit. I darned it out of myths. Some of the myths were beautiful. Some turned ugly in the making. The myth of the slender girl, the myth of the fat one, the myth of rescue, the myth of young men, the myth of the hair in their eyes, the myth of how beauty would save them, the myth of me and who I must become, the myth of what I am not, and the horses who are no myth, how they do not need to turn Pegasus. They are winged in their unmyth. They holy up the ground. I must holy up the ground. I sanctify the ground and say, fuck it. I say fuck it in a way that does not invite death. I say fuck it and fall down, no new holes. And I ride an unwinged horse, and I unbecome myself, and I strip my poison suit and wear my crown of fuck it. Spirit fear. The room where I will die is everywhere. I am hiding from a signal on the road. Signal from the angels or signal from the mother. Signal from the dog, who is a wolf, who is me. Signal from myself that I gag not to hear. Signal from the earth and under the earth. And I hear the roar of the walls. And I eat a young man in the room of my death. I make everything into a lantern. I make pockets of darkness so the room looks like heaven. And I declare my love to the darkness. Its cocks and its holes like my cocks and my holes. Stick a rag in my mouth for my lover. Make the dead smell like the dead. It's very dramatic poetry. All right. Judgment. This is a poem I wrote. I used to have a poetry series in New York, and we would do like themed situations, and we did the tarot deck. And so the card I had was Judgment. So this is the poem I wrote for that. And it's in Scarecrone, now in Superdoom. Judgment. When the preacher comes to town, I try to hump the preacher. I try to hump angels. I cannot untouch sublime beings. My guardian angels are mine and all for me. When they leak me. Still there are cracks between us, and you have to fill up cracks with candy. If I am not allowed candy, I use my body. If I am not allowed my body, I use the internet. Television is going to deliver me from the internet. The angels pray over my screens. My angels are probably lonely, also disillusioned with me. I have always felt the presence of a disappointed being. The preacher says I am not dead. I am definitely dying. I am already digging out of my coffin. I dress in cicada skins. I go bright blonde. Above me is the blonde angel Raphael, and I try to make the blonde angel French me. The blonde angel has a thick tongue. He wants to talk about healing, the violence no one has done to me. Every violence I have done to me. When I leak me. What was so hell that I violenced me, that I knifed the wounds into my wings? There were always beautiful horses. There were cracks in all the horses. When I stuffed their mouths with candy, they turned to rotten. I made candy luncheons in the pasture. It tasted very desire. I poured cherry soda into all my cracks. Tell the angels to give me sugar if they do not want to hump me. A supreme being should heal me, but only for forever. I always have this dream that I'm doing a poetry reading and I open the book and there's no words. And I just make something up and it's not very good. But this book has words. Okay. Power Nothing is the last poem I'll read. Power Nothing. When I say I am a fierce woman, I mean I am a gentle woman. When I say I am a gentle woman, I mean leave me alone. When I say leave me alone, I mean I don't know what to do. When I say I don't know what to do, I mean help. When I say help, I mean I believe in something bigger. When I say I believe in something bigger, I mean because I want to. When I say because I want to, I mean because I need to. When I say because I need to, I mean to live.
Wow. Just that's like the cliche, like wow. I should just sound like a poetry, like Wow. Well, thank you so much for reading. That's excellent. Funny enough, I told you it was gonna be my first question, but it's funny enough that you mentioned the line, television is going to deliver me from the internet, because we previously discussed how you don't watch as much TV, but I told you I was going to ask you about the Frasier series finale. And so what did you think about it?
I was surprised that there was a poem in it. The Tennyson.
Uh-huh.
I had to Google to find out what that poem was. But yeah, that was, Frasier, we were talking about how it's such a soothing show that it's like, it's really an ambient vibe, but I hadn't made it to like the last couple seasons. So I had no idea that like the dad was getting married, but I thought that it was kind of sad. It was good. It was definitely, yeah, it was a little sad though. What do you think?
It takes on this whole like, every time I watch it straight through, I always, because in my bio I mentioned the fact that I cry every time at the end when Niles is like, I'm gonna miss these coffees. That moment just speaks to me. But for me personally, it's
You're
just
like me too,
time,
Niles.
literally, I'm just like, I do miss the coffees. I just, because I like watch the whole, it's Frasier's a roller coaster of emotions, some good, some bad, but every time I watch it, I just feel like it's just such a satisfying ending because what you think is going to happen doesn't, and you're just kind of like, oh, like, and you feel like Frasier has, even though he spent the whole series like not growing as a person, you like feel like at the end you're like, okay, he kind of grew, and it just feels like you're saying goodbye to family.
Totally. Well, how many times have you watched Frasier as a series through, would you say?
I would say probably like 11 times.
You're committed.
It's like on everything I reference, it's on like my dating apps, and people will message me and be like, Frasier, huh? And I'm like, yes, let's discuss. So it's like a good little icebreaker.
I find it really endearing that your love and your passion for it, and when I saw it in your bio, I knew we were going to have to discuss, because yeah, it is endearing to me, that you remain committed, that you're verbal about your love, that you're sharing the love, and that you look, that you give a closer look into the text, as it were, of the Frasier. It's not just a cursory viewership.
It's deep, it's emotional now.
Yeah, it's emotional. I feel the emotion. No, I do. And I think that's what I think that's what I've been responding to is yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, of course. Thank you.
I mean, Kelsey Grammer, I'm not going to like message him, but I would be like, just know that someone out there is seeking you, and just, I hope you're doing well.
Someone is thinking about you.
Dear Kelsey.
He would probably feel fairly seen, I think, if he knew. Yeah.
I hope you feel confident.
Yeah.
All right. It's been a whole week since this glorious, beautiful collection has come out. How did it feel to like revisit some of these pieces, especially because, some of them have been out for years. They're all, most of the collections are out of date. How does it feel to like select, I'm assuming, what was your favorites ones?
Right. Well, so I wanted to know. So my first book is When You Say One Thing But Mean Your Mother. And I was like, after I decided the reason why I decided to do this with Tin House is because these three books, I like to call them, I forget what Tin House called them, cult favorites. And I love just thinking of having like cult's just like that's just like a hot, like cult, what are they? Cult out of print poetry collections. Like, fuck yeah. Cult. So the cult collections, those three cult collections, not Last Sext, but the other three were out of print. And actually, Scarecrone, which was my third poetry book, is like probably my favorite thing I've ever published. And I was sad that it was out of print. So I was very excited to do this with Tin House, and get these cult books back out there in the form of Superdoom. But when I was going back over When You Say One Thing But Mean Your Mother, which is the first thing I wrote, I was like, can we just like not have any poems from that one in there? And they were like, well, like it's it's like supposed to be like a career spanning or whatever. So like, let's do a couple. So I found the ones that I like disliked least from
the ones that made you cringe the least. They're like, oh,
yeah,
this isn't as bad.
Okay. Yeah. It's just, it was like, I don't know what it is about those poems. I guess I was like deep in an MFA at that point. My MFA took me 8 years to finish because I only took one class a semester. because I didn't want to go into debt for poetry, and so I worked full time, and my job paid like, it was like $2,500 a year towards if you wanted to do some school. So this classes at City College were like $1,000 a class. So I just did one a semester, and then my job could pay for the whole thing. Cause I didn't like know you could like apply for fellowship. Like I don't know how, I just don't know these things, but I didn't. So that was, and it was cool. But then like, I was like in my early 30s, and I'm like writing a paper on Moby Dick. And I'm just like, how am I still here? Like this needs to fucking end, like enough is enough already. But so I think I was like pretty early in the MFA, and like doing a lot of like form, and like, I don't know, to me, they're a little bit cornier than the others.
Do you feel like, because I know, especially when a lot of people release like best of collections or things like that, it feels almost like a different person wrote it? Do you feel like a completely like different Melissa wrote it? Like how different do you think current Melissa and like MFA Melissa are?
That's a really good question. I mean, same shit, different day kind of a thing. But I will say, well, one thing that's interesting is like, in when you say One Thing But Me and Your Mother and Milk Fed, there were actually some like themes in there. I mean, a lot of the themes are the same. Like I'm kind of, like I'd say my themes that continue to emerge are like probably like, longing and sex, like death, and like, what is all of this kind of, like the juicies. But there were actually some sort of like, there was like, I always remembered all my older poems as kind of dwelling in like the symbolism of like Catholicism more. And I don't know why, but that's just like something that had fascinated me for a long time. And but actually, like there were some really Jewy poems, and like I was like, oh, this is very milk fed. Like milk appeared, and like a mikvah, which is like the Jewish ritual bath, like appeared, and like eating disorders appeared, and all that stuff is like what I just wrote about in Milk Fed. So it was interesting that like even unconsciously, like your obsessions are your obsessions, your themes are your themes, and sometimes your symbols are your symbols.
Perfectly put.
Yeah.
You write, I'm going to read just like one of these lines that spoke to me personally, just based on previous conversations we've had. You write that you love that a poem can be a vessel for living in the questions themselves, a spirit of ambiguity, a celebration of negative capability, a field for beginner's mind, a braid of darkness and light, and a fortress of sacred pause. And it's funny because when you asked me to be your conversation partner, and I was like, I have this problem where I like don't feel smart enough to talk about poetry, because I'm always just like, what does the poem mean? What happens? What's the feeling? And you beautifully said that no one knows what the fuck is going on in a poem, which made me feel very secure. I was like, thank you. It's not me. It's just not me. So my idea is like, do you think that a poem is something that happens to a writer? Like, how does that belief influence like the work that you do? Is it more of like passive, or is it more like intentional?
These are really good questions, BTW. So it's a really good question. I think that, well, I talked in the introduction about like wanting to be a channel, right? Or about like how to get out of my own way. And I have all these tricks, whether it's prose or poetry, for getting out of my own way. And I feel like that's really important in a first draft. I think later in the editing process, I guess I would put it like this, that for me, an ideal first draft is that it's happening to me. Mm-hmm. And then in ideal edits is that like I'm happening to it. So, so in the first draft of anything, I really don't even want to be thinking about an audience or legibility or anything related to perfection or like agile communication, or like I really just want to like get the clay, and I feel like it's the clay that is the happening. And the more that I can let the happening happen, the better. That's why I dictate all my prose, my first drafts, because my mouth moves faster than my hand, and but then in the editorial process, it's really about like seeking. So when I edit, I reread and reread and reread, and I say, is this true? And when I say, is this true, I don't mean like in a reality sense. I mean, like there's a bones truth. Like and when it gets very quiet, there's a quiet. When it gets quiet to me, that's how I know it's done. The opposite of quiet is when certain words stand out and I'm like, I don't know. Like if something's standing out to me, if I don't read it, then there's something rhythmically off, either in prose or poetry. And because with prose, I think I bring like the rhythm of lyric poetry. I use punctuation to try to create that. So, and yeah, every once in a while, a poem is just born to you whole, and that's fucking amazing. That's like the muses and the gift. But I think it's like working in tandem. It's kind of like if a person prays, right? Like if a person prays, it's like, and God were to be like you row, like I'll steer, that sort of a thing.
So then so you said that you speak, you dictate when it's prose, you like read it as like voice memos. When you do poetry, do you write? Do you notice a different like feeling based on anyone? Like why necessarily do you do voice memos when it comes to like prose?
Well, what happened was, so I used to live in New York, and I only wrote poetry when I lived there. And I wrote a lot on the subway, and I would write on my phone. I never write at a desk. I don't edit at a desk either. Like I usually edit in bed, or I'm sitting on this, you can't see it, but it's just like kind of a chaise longue. Yes, it's just, I've got it. I don't know if you can see here. I've got Pickle on my lap, my secretary. This is, and I've got like a furry blanket on it. This is like my desk, right? And then I've got like my side table with like stuff. And then the computer, my desk, I guess you could say, is this box that I rest my computer on. But I don't like a desk. So even for editing, I don't use a desk. But what happened was, so I would always write my first drafts kind of like in motion or when I wasn't supposed to be writing. And when I moved to Los Angeles, I stopped. I couldn't like write poems and drive. Like I couldn't type and drive, and that was how I was getting everywhere. So I started dictating, and the line breaks disappeared, and it became more conversational. And that's how I started writing prose. Like, I don't know if I would have started writing prose had I not moved here and started dictating in the car. So I don't dictate my first drafts of poetry. I do dictate my first drafts of prose, but it kind of happened organically. Like it happened, like it's not really a structure that I imposed. I then replicated that though, that structure in order to write my 2 novels. So like I started dictating, the language became prose. That's how I wrote So Sad Today. And then I was like inspired to write a novel. And so I did the Pisces. So I was able to replicate that because it had been, and then I was able to replicate that again for Milk Fed. And I'm kind of replicating that again now for this other thing I'm doing, writing. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know. It might be a piece of shit, but unclear, very much a seed. But yeah.
So then do you feel like you could, in these like 2 vivid forms, both either like voice memos or like writing on a page or, fiction or nonfiction, how do you push past the fear of being vulnerable on a page? Like when you're speaking to your phone, do you ever like hear yourself say something you're like, ugh, like I'll just think about it later? Or do you just like push forward and just like to pretend like you're talking to like a friend?
Well, so all of my tricks, everything I do is to try to have as little censorship as possible in my first draft. So I don't think of an audience. I don't think of the legibility. I don't think of any repercussions. It's strictly just throw it down. Nobody's ever going to see this. It's in the editing that I begin to think about people seeing it and the legibility. I think in terms of though, like the fear component, like, because some of my stuff gets a little like there is stuff that I've published, and it's not really in the publishing that I get self-conscious. It's in the when like an aunt or a former boss or someone who knows me in a certain context, like a friend of my parents tells me that they've read it, that's when I get self-conscious like that. And I'm almost like, why did they do that? Like, I feel like they like infringed. Like, I'm like, how? Like, it almost feels like they read my diary. But then I'm like, it's public, you know, like anybody can read it. But that's like the feeling I get. Like sometimes in the publication process, I can feel that self-consciousness. But it's more, my edits are more for like legibility and like, well, how would I read this? Like, how I try to read it through as like, what I do when I'm editing is I email myself PDF after PDF after PDF, and I'll work on like just chunks at a time. And the reason why I keep emailing myself PDFs is I like to see it as a little different than just like a Microsoft Word doc. Like, I want to try to see it as someone who's reading it for the first time. I mean, obviously that's like impossible, but to the best of my ability, you know? So I try to mess with the format as much as possible. I want to be a stranger encountering it.
Oh, okay. Speaking of, I'm a big fan of you in general, but I definitely love.
I'm a big fan of you in general.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
I was a big fan of Milk Fed and the Pisces. The thing that for me is like, it's always interesting to see, like, you write such vivid characters who are so quintessentially just like messy. Like they're usually like very sexual beings. There's usually some kind of aspect of awareness. Like they're always aware of the things. They just don't know how to like fix the issues that are at hand. And it's really funny to me because I think that, especially with women writers and like, well, not necessarily, like, don't want to generalize, but some women writers feel the need to write to be likable themselves and to be like also like write these really likable characters. And I feel like you are the queen of writing these characters who like identify with but don't necessarily like. And so I was wondering if you could speak about like, how do you craft these characters in your mind, and whether or not for you, like as a reader or a writer, if these characters need to be likable for you to enjoy them.
Well, so one thing is that sometimes I don't even realize that my characters aren't likable. It's only on Goodreads that I find out. So, yeah. So I'm like, oh, like, yes, she has challenges. Like, she has problems. Like, yeah, she makes some fucked up choices. Like, yeah, she's not like pristine, but I'm always like, oh, well, but like, she's fine. And then I'm like, oh, I write unlikable characters. Okay. So it's kind of like, actually, I mean, that happened with Lucy and the Pisces too. Like, I didn't quite realize, I mean, yes. Well, I don't want to do a spoiler, but there's something involving a dog that like, yes, that's not like the greatest, but like, but I'm always like, but it's a fiction. It's not a real dog. Like, people on Goodreads got mad because they said it was like, I like abused an animal. And I'm like, honey, like, the dog's not real. He doesn't exist. My dog, meanwhile, is like living in the like lap of, he's like fucking chilling. But so that's one thing, is I don't always realize that they're not likable. I'm like, well, I like them. But the other thing I think is, also with the Pisces, people asked me the question, they were like, what was it like writing about depression in a fictional sense after having written about it in So Sad Today? And I was like, Lucy's depressed? Like, I didn't even realize. And then like, when I look back at the book, I'm like, oh, it's like, of course she's depressed. She's like, she fucking says she's depressed. But sometimes it doesn't, I don't know, like I feel very connected to them. And so I don't necessarily see it as such because I'm kind of in them. Right? Like, it's harder to see yourself when you're inside yourself. And I think with a first person protagonist, especially, it can be hard. Like, I'm in there, like I'm up in there. So it's hard to like diagnose. I'm not going to diagnose. And I also there's this Milan Kundera quote that I've always really loved. Wait, let me just find it. Which I don't think necessarily influences the way I write, but maybe it justifies it. And I'm like, yeah, like I feel like, but hold on, let me just find it. It's this Milan Kundera quote. Okay. All right, here it is. Love this one. Okay. Suspending moral judgment is not the immorality of the novel. It is its morality. The morality that stands against the ineradicable human habit of judging instantly, ceaselessly, and everyone, of judging before and in the absence of understanding. From the viewpoint of the novel's wisdom, that fervid readiness to judge is the most detestable stupidity, the most pernicious evil. Not that the novelist utterly denies that moral judgment is legitimate, but that he refuses it a place in the novel. And then he goes on to talk about like different characters.
So someone actually asked a really good question. They said that they're wondering if it's possibly because you see them as a whole person and not just in the phase that they're in at that time.
Yeah. And also because let's be honest, they're my children. You know, they have my DNA. Like, you know, my dog can do no wrong. Like I don't have children. My plants can do no wrong. Well, my plants, like there's a lot of problems, but you know, but I'm the problem. Actually, with my dog too. Like he's spoiled. I'm the problem. And maybe with my characters, I'm like, well, I'm the problem. You know, it's not like we have the same DNA, so I'm kind of very permissive. You know, and also I'm like, oh well, I feel like a lot of my books, or I feel like a lot of my stuff too, especially milk fed, like it's kind of like this, not that it's okay. So like, I feel like currently there's like self-love or like learning to like recovery or learning to like be okay with oneself or self-love are sort of marketed as these like journeys with like a finite destination, like that it's a product to be sold, or that you arrive or you like do the like self-care action and then like you become this other. Whereas to me, in my experience, like it's you never get off the train. Like, you know, like you don't just like, there's no pill and then suddenly like that's it, you know, like it's a continual, I'm like throwing around a bunch of metaphors, but it's a continual peeling of the onion, right? And like whoever gets, like you can get well, you can get more well, but who gets perfect, you know? Like it's that wouldn't be human. So I think, yes, it is a smaller journey that's part of like a larger odyssey of their life. And you know, and I think like Kundera says, it's just like, well, like we all have our reasons, you know, and I sort of I know where they come from and why they are like this. And sometimes they know where they come from and why they are like this, but knowledge doesn't always avail us anything, right? It's action. So you can be like really smart, but not be able to change. What does it take, you know?
So speaking of which, someone asked if there were any real life characters or story inspirations for Milkfed or the Pisces.
Yeah, of course. So the Pisces, I was inspired at a time where I was my marriage, I was in an open marriage for a while, and then we'd been monogamous for many years, and then we had an open marriage for many years, and then we became monogamous again. And I was sort of mourning the whole like death of my life of non-monogamy. Mm-hmm. And I also was questioning, like, this is something that a lot of people learn at like age like 15, but I don't know why it's hard for me. Like, I was just questioning why fantasy can't be reality, and why like a love that is distant and maybe more of a fool's gold and maybe at a remove, and why is it so much more intoxicating than like a fucking healthy ass long-term loving, you know, where you know each other. It's because you can't make a real human who is real to you into a drug, you know, mm-hmm. Especially not when you live together, because it's just, I mean, maybe you can. I have not found a way to do that. So whereas the stranger, it's very easy to make them into a drug because it's all about what's going on inside your head. They're not a real human. And so that book was really me, like, not exercising the demons, but just really trying, like, asking that question for myself and mourning, like mourning. So that's that one. And then I was on the beach and I just, like, I don't know, I read this book, The Professor and the Siren, about a man who falls in love with a mermaid. And I was like, oh, well, why can't it be a merman and an older woman? And that's how it kind of spun out. But the like germ, was I was going through that. And then Milk Fed is a story I've wanted to tell since I was like 17 or 18, no, maybe like 19 years old. I think I wrote a really shitty short story version of it when I was like 19. The Jewish elements weren't involved and the spiritual elements and the mother stuff, but like about a love affair between a woman who is like zoftig and very comfortable with her body and a woman with an eating disorder. That was a story I'd written, and it was a really shitty short story, but I've always wanted to tell it. And I guess I just didn't know exactly. And then I started thinking, I guess, about the way that appetites are interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can't separate hunger from desire, from spiritual yearning, even from familial longing, because, like, our parents are our first gods. So I think that's how I sort of came to, like, oh, well, this is how I'm going to tell it. Like, I want to tell it through this Jewish context. Also, because, like, Judaism and food have always been very synonymous to me.
So you're also the person behind the incredible Twitter feed and essay collection, both called So Sad Today. And I've been following for years, even before I knew who you were. And then I found out who you were and I was like, oh my God, yes, okay. There's a person behind this. Woohoo! Like, it just feels like it's like this universal feed where I feel like no matter what, I can be having the best day of my life and I just see a tweet pop up and I'm like, yeah, I feel this right now. I'm just like, this is who I am. I too am sad right now for no reason. For me, it's really interesting because, you have this, you have your like real Twitter persona, you have So Sad Today, which is also very much like, I feel like it's very much you and, your quintessential thoughts. And, you do such a great job of like presenting yourself on social media as like, this like really fun and energetic, but like just kooky person. And I'm wondering how do you decide, either when we're writing personal essays or, on the Twitter, on any social media, how do you decide what to share and what to keep close? And then were you ever afraid of revealing yourself behind that So Sad Today Twitter account?
Good questions. Really good questions. Yes, I was. Okay, well, I'll start with, was I ever afraid? Yes, I was. The So Sad Today account started because I worked in an office when I lived in New York, because I was always a poet with a day job, because poetry does not make it rain. And so for 10 years, I worked in an office. And before that, I was pizza delivery girl, best job ever. And I went door to door for the Sierra Club. I did like all kinds of stuff. But then I worked as a book publicist for 10 years. And I was going through, I've gone through periods where I've always had general anxiety disorder and I've always had depression, but ever since I was 21, I've gone through certain cycles in my life where the panic attacks are like really intense, because once you get one, then you fear having another, and then you become oversensitized and you're obsessing about like, when's the next, whatever. You just become hypervigilant, hyper aware to a fault. And so I was going through one of those cycles and it was very existential, because it was sort of triggered by like the death of someone I knew. And I didn't think I was going to be able to like stay in my office, I didn't think I was going to be able to stay seated. And I also felt like just very lonely. Like it felt very isolating to be having this whole thing going on inside me and no one knew. So I started tweeting anonymously from the So Sad Today account as sort of a valve, right, for that, from my office. And so I wasn't tweeting any of that stuff from my personal Twitter because like people I worked with followed it, it didn't feel. So I did that for 3 years. I think it was anonymous. And it's funny too, because my personal Twitter account, like I just like always wanted to have like a popular Twitter, you know, like whatever. We all want to be fucking popular.
Yeah.
I want to be popular. And like, if that account was fine, but the Society account where I was basically just like taking a shit on the internet, like it was just like no curation, just like, that's the one. And of course it's anonymous, that becomes like, you know, popular and so, but I was scared. Even I didn't even want to. So even after I decided to do the So Sad Today book, which it might have even been like, I don't think I came out publicly till like for 4 years actually. But even when I decided to do the So Sad Today book, I wanted to do it anonymously, but they were like, no, because you're a poet, you have a name, so you have to do it. So I waited though to come out like in their catalog copy for the So Sad Today book. I was like, it has to say by anonymous. Like I'm not doing it till the very last minute. So I waited a long time. And what was I afraid of? I was afraid of what I'm afraid of with everything else in my life, that I would not be enough. Right. So like people like this thing, but she's going to be a disappointment. Me, you know, like that, like, oh, like that, like this bitch, like it's, you know, the human isn't whatever. The fear of not being enough, that drives up pretty much most shit in my life. So, yeah, so that's what I was afraid of, like that there would be, I don't know, just like judgment in, and it could be myriad. I can always find something to fear being judged for. You know what I'm saying? Like it, like I'm either too, like I could be to this and not enough the same exact thing, just in different contexts. You know what I'm saying? So that was, I think, like what I was most afraid of. But at that point, I was no longer working in an office or anything. And I felt really validated that, like, you know, when you have a lot of people following, like the things that you've revealed that are so like raw that you were once afraid of revealing, that element of it is much less scary. You know, like I wasn't scared to say anymore, like, okay, you know, I have anxiety disorder. Although, or like I go through this. Although, I'll say this one more thing. When I was doing the publicity for the So Sad Today book, I was meeting with some journalists and I had to have like lunch with a journalist and do an interview. There was another one where journalists came and hung out with me for a day. And I was like, oh my God, what if I have a panic attack in front of the journalists and I like have to like get out of there, or I feel really, really uncomfortable. And then I was like, wait, like this is literally a book about anxiety and you're afraid of, like, that would actually probably be the best thing if you had
like
a fucking panic. But
that's
it's
marketing.
But it's so different being disembodied.
Mm-hmm.
It, you know, and that's the thing about being a writer, it's disembodied. You get to control the narrative. Whereas when you're in your body, it's like you're so vulnerable.
So then how do you control, like, does that fear of like not being enough, or like, you know, that aspect depict on like influence like what you choose to share online versus not to?
Well, now, I mean, I feel like the So Sad Today Twitter, I wish I didn't still tweet from it. At this point, it's just another addiction. Like, it's like I feel a feeling. And then I'm like, okay, well, I can either like sit with this and like, you know, whatever, like what a therapist wants you to, you know, like sit with this and like feel the feeling. Or I can like tweet something funny about it and like get dopamine and not feel feeling anymore. And I'm like, let's go with option B, you know? And so, so often the like the impetus for the tweet is still the same. It's discomfort in my body, in the world, in the psyche, you know, in the feelings, whichever, but it's discomfort, which is probably also an impetus, you know, why I started writing anything in the first place. It's, you know, discomfort with reality, discomfort with existing, just a gritty feeling, the itch. But I think that now it's like, instead of it just being like, it doesn't stay raw, then it's like, then I'm like, oh, like, but okay, if I say it this way, like, then I'm gonna get like this real flood of dopamine, you know, it's kind of, so it's less genuine. The feeling is still the same. It still comes from the same discomfort. Like I'm still dealing with the same shit, but sometimes I'm like, oh, well, I don't know if I'm gonna say that, because, and also, you know, it's like, well, Lenny Bruce said that the only time we're ever truly ourselves is when we like drop a can of peaches on the floor and we're like eating the peaches like off the floor, and someone like the syrupy peach, and someone walks in and busts us. So am I myself on the internet? I don't know.
Are you eating the peaches? Are you like?
Well, it's like I'm eating the peaches off the floor, but I knew you were coming.
Oh, that's really way to think about it. I think so many, especially when you're like, you have social media, I'm even guilty of doing it. Like you do these like actions. So you're like, oh, okay, like I know someone's going to see this and I know it's going to get some reaction. And sometimes it's like, oh, like I just simply want the reaction. Just like, cause I like the dopamine hit from getting like going like viral on Twitter or like getting a bunch of likes on Instagram, like that can feel so powerful. And you're like, yes, like if I could just harness that power, oh, I'd be the worst human alive. But I feel like it's just so, it's just such a like breath of fresh air when you're just like, yes, this is it. I got this. Speaking of which,
yeah, like do you feel like you take that into consideration like before you tweet something, or is it like sometimes yes and sometimes it's more like you tweet something and then immediately it's like you check the app to see like, all right, what's coming down, like all right, who's with me?
I personally like I do a little bit. So if I think I will tweet something and I'll be like, oh, I think this is gonna be really funny. Like I think people really like this. And so instead of tweeting it right away at like 10 p.m., I'll like put it in my draft so that we can tweet it at like 10 a.m. So like, people will like more eyes will see it. And like it's like this whole thing where I'm just like, okay, I'll wait. I'll just like see who sees it, And then I just kind of like I personally am like a little bit above, like I talk about like my dating life a lot on Twitter.
Yes.
And I've surprisingly gotten like a lot of traction. Like people like really will root for it and like ask me questions, and which makes it really funny because then when I'm like, oh, actually, I should probably stop tweeting about this person that like it doesn't actually know I'm probably tweeting about them. But like I'm just like, maybe you'll see this and think it's really funny and we'll get married. Sorry. Like I'm just like I have to warn everyone that I date, and I'm like, listen, I'm a very like public person. But I grew up on MySpace. Like I grew up, on like the whole like live journals and like Zanga and like talking about my feelings, and that's I just never shut up. So it's like a little bit of both.
Mood.
And
well, I really like your dating tweets. So yeah, it's good because it's they're funny, and also you get to kind of, I don't know, we all like want to be, well, like especially for me, like I feel like it's just fun to live vicariously because like I'm middle-aged, like my life's basically like I'm like very close to dead, no, I'm not, but you know what I'm saying. It's like, yeah, it's fun. I'm like, oh, things are still chaotic, like, oh, like that's so like just when there was still like potentiality and hope and possibility.
I get like a lot of people who will be like, they're like, I've been married for so long, it's just nice to see someone just like going through the trenches of just crap. And I'm like, thanks. Like I just got ghosted again. Thanks for enjoying this moment for you. Someone asked, when it comes to queer books, what sort of stories do you want to see most in the world? And they said they recently loved and read Milkfed.
Oh, cool. Wait, what is the question? Sorry, I was I was posting your Twitter in the chat. Your Twitter's Latina Belcher too, right?
It's so instead of BLCK, it's BLK on Twitter.
BLK, okay.
Someone asked, when it comes to queer books, what sort of stories do you most want to see in the world?
That's a good question. Well, do you want me to tell you some things that I love and that I'd probably want to see like more of that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, here's what I love. I love longing. Oh, also sorry, I'm having like 8 thoughts. Okay, number 1, what I love longing, I love magic, and I love funny. So if you can get a book with all 3, it's gonna be like my favorite book. So like Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawler. Funny, fantastical, hot. Done. My 3. Those are my big 3, right? If I can get 2 of those, like I'm in, there's a book called like The Ice Palace by Tarjei Vessas that I love, or like that I read. Let me pull up my, I always like, I keep a little diary of things that I read and loved. Also, you can always check out my Goodreads. And on Bookshop, I made a Books of Longing list. Yes, that I made it. I was hoping that they would like feature it. All I've ever wanted is to have like a featured list on.
Oh, I'll just ask. I work for
Bookshop.
Bookshops. I'll just ask them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'll just be like, Kevin, put the list on the screen.
Oh, awesome. I mean, I told Katherine, like, my dream was to be in an airport, and now I'm in an airport bookstore. So my other dream is to have it on the books. Yeah. And if they need me, okay. But so I love books of obsession. So like Hervé Guibert, I love Crazy for Vincent. I love books where like people, and it's very funny. That one's not like a book that has a lot of magic per se, but it's like 2 out of 3 are very kind of strong. I also loved Confessions of a Mask by Yukio Mishima. That's like another book that I read recently that again, it's like longing, but humor, not really like the fantastic as much. Yeah, so it's usually my faves, and it can be like straight books too. I feel like I'm trying to think of something else that has like all 3 of those things. Well, like I really loved The Life of the Mind this year. That came out this year by Christine Smallwood. Again, that's like it's humor and there's longing, but no fantasy. Oh, 100 Boyfriends by Brontez Purnell. Yeah, if every book, what do I want to see more of? 100 Boyfriends and Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl. Because 100 Boyfriends had some magic in it, and it was fucking funny, and it was hot and full of longing. So it like hit all 3, you know?
That's just a chef's kiss. Like that's it. That's perfect.
It's just what I'm looking for. You know, like I love Marguerite Duras, but like she doesn't really bring the funny. But I still love her because she's like the longing queen. I love Colette. You know, she brings the funny, she brings the, so it's like, you know, usually that's my recipe. But yeah, Brontez's book 100 Boyfriends is great. That book, I think I would like, well, is this 4 stars or 5? You know, is this 3 or 4? Like, what?
Or is it like, is it a 4.75? Like, do they just?
Yeah, well, they should open it up to that, because that would be good.
Like, let me have like a quarter star, like a system where it's like, and instead of being like, okay, exactly 5 stars, like, let me just like press, like, if I press half the star in the middle, or like I could just like slice it down, and it's like, they're like, you know what, you still 4.5 still good. Like, that's still a beautiful rating.
4.5 is fabulous.
Yes.
But because it's only 4 and 5, and because it's very rare that I give a 3. If I give a 3, it's like, I really didn't like it. But like, I felt like, but I wanted to include it for whatever reason. But like, but that's not even how it's supposed to be, right? Like a 4 is supposed to be like, this was a great book. But a 4 for me is like, it was pretty good. Like, yeah, I liked it. Like a 5, I feel like anything that's not a 5, like I feel bad about. But a 4.5 would rectify that situation. I think it would allow for more honesty.
Or it's like, I feel like a 4.5 would be like, I recommend this book. It's not one of my favorites, but I think you should read it.
I love this book. It's not Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. That's my like new personal standard for what I'm holding everything. Like, you know, that's a 5. I mean, like, what else do you need? I just read that this year, actually, for the first time. Like, I was shaking in bed. But yeah, like, all right, it's not Tolstoy, but it's fucking amazing. 4.5. If I got all 4.5s on my books, I'd be so happy.
That'd be so good.
Yeah.
I would love that for you. I would love that for everyone. Every writer, like if you tried it, just everyone automatically gets a 4.5, and then you have to like watch. I feel like each day would just like take either down or slightly up, and you would just be watching the clock just to see what the new reviews are. I feel like that would be like, it would be like Twitter if Twitter was Goodreads. I feel like Twitter is basically like Goodreads. It's like got the same components where you're like seeing how much like attention you can get and how well it's liked and all the fans.
Let me grade your thoughts. I'm gonna give your thoughts a star rating.
Yes. Before, I think we probably got like, I got 2 more questions. We'll see if I can squeeze them in really fast. I know in June, unfortunately, I believe your father passed away. My condolences. I do want to ask, like, you know, as someone who, you know, last year my grandmother passed away, and it was, you know, I was trying to write. And I know that you haven't written poetry in like, you know, about 5 years since the last Sext book. But like, do you think, like, in a way, like how will grief affect future work? Like whether you're working on it now, whether you write something about your father, like in general, or like how will it affect going forward, like your creativity process?
Well, I love my dad very deeply. I'm kind of still amazed by how deeply. He was in an accident in December, and he was in the ICU for 6 months, in and out of consciousness. And at first I didn't get to see him because of COVID for months, but my sister and I would FaceTime him every day, whether he was conscious or unconscious. And then I got vaccinated, and I got to go a number of times to see him before he died. And there were we thought he was going to die 3 times in the middle of that, and he didn't die. And then I was actually home visiting him. All that to say, so Superdoom is dedicated to my dad. I forgot how filthy some of the poems in the book are. I'm like, oh, this is a little inappropriate. But Superdoom and my dad, he was instructed not to read my prose, just because like I don't want to watch a filthy movie with my dad. You know what I'm saying? Like he doesn't need to be reading about like my characters having anal. But my poetry, he was always allowed to read. He didn't like we were talking about. I felt like I was channeling my dad when we were talking about the understanding poetry or not. And he was always like, I don't understand it, you know. And it's like, who does? But here are the things. I'll tell you 3 things really, really quickly that I'm going to list them that I've learned through this experience that I think will inevitably are going to be part. One, well, not learned, but here are 3 things. One is my relationship to plants and trees has now totally changed. I feel really connected. And my dad was like a plant tree person. I kill everything, but I feel like that's part of me now. That's definitely gonna influence. I feel an awareness of talking with spirits, as it were, now. Like I see it differently. So I'm sure that will have an impact on my work. And I don't know what the third one was.
You're like, I have 2. Like,
yeah.
Perfect. And then my last question, I just, you know, as someone who like, you know, reads, loves your work, and I'm sure, you know, you're a big reader as well. If you could, like, what is the feeling, like, if you could sum up the feeling that you want to leave your readers after they close the book, any book you read, like, what is the feeling that you want to leave with them?
Well, I mean, I think it's the Emily Dickinson thing, right? Like a poem, you know, takes the top of your head off. I mean, whatever. Like, if you're asking what I want to leave my readers with, it's like, I want to take the top of the head off, because like, whatever. But circumcise the head. But a feeling, I don't know. I guess I'll say this. When people tell me that they experience, like, that they feel simpatico when they read my books, I'm always happy.
Mhm.
So a feeling of simpatico, right? That's, I think that's, while I don't always aim for that, because I'm probably more selfish, it's always nice when I hear that, like a feeling of being understood, or, like the Walt Whitman thing, like reaching the hand out, like, oh, camarado, like, even when I'm dead, right? Like, I'm reaching the hand out of the book and holding someone else's hand.
Someone was like, I feel the same. You're like, thank you. Like reaching a hand out, like,
Yeah. I'm like, okay, but let's not touch.
Social distance. I'm sorry. It was like, it's a pandemic. It's beforehand. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Thanks. Hey, first of all, thanks. Oh, someone asked a question.
Catherine, thank you so much. Oh. This was really fun.
Someone actually, real quick, they want to know if you will ever teach a writing class or any writing class.
Oh, yeah, I could. Sure. Email me especially if you're with the university, but if you're not, that's fine too. I don't know. I could do one online. I could do one online.
Yeah, well, why not? Thank you so much for, asking me to do this. This is so wonderful. And it's an honor.
Oh my God. No, this was great. You're a fun talker.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thanks, Catherine, for doing this. In the chat, I just posted the link to our YouTube channel. You can watch all of our events, past events there. This event will probably be popping up there tomorrow sometime. You can tell your friends that missed it that they can tune in there and watch it. And one more link in the chat for Melissa's books. Here's Superdoom right here. Great book, great cover design as always, Tin House.
Jacob Vala, I saw his name before. He's the best. Look.
I think he was watching tonight.
Gorgeous.
Oh, there he is. He popped up.
Oh, there he is.
It's gorgeous. He did.
I love you.
He outdid himself.
Yeah, Jake's the best. All right. Thanks, you guys, for doing this. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And check out powells.com/events for other stuff coming up in the near future. And enjoy your summers, everyone. Melissa, Catherine, everyone else. Good night.
Bye.